Disclaimer: this program contains graphic descriptions of real crimes. Viewer discretion is advised. All parties are presumed innocent until proven guilty in court. If you had driven past the Harper house that Sunday night, you would have seen something ordinary. Warm lights glowing through the windows, shadows moving around a dinner table, a family laughing. And if you had frozen that moment, right before the knock, you would have captured the last second they were whole. Because by the end of that night, a mother would question everything she thought she knew about her son. A wife would realize she had been living beside a stranger. And a family dinner would turn into the beginning of a murder trial. All it took was 3 knocks at the door. The first Sunday of every month belonged to the Harpers. No excuses, no cancellations. Margaret Harper believed traditions held families together. So at exactly 6 p.m., the roast came out of the oven, the candles were lit, and the dining room filled with the familiar rhythm of plates and polite laughter. Thomas Harper carved the chicken with steady hands, the way he had for 32 years. Across from him sat Daniel Harper, their eldest son, 34, well-dressed, confident, the kind of man who shook hands firmly and smiled easily. Beside Daniel sat his wife, Claire, quiet that evening. Her smile lingered half a second too short. On the other side of the table was Emily, Daniel's younger sister, observant, protective, a nurse who had learned how to read people by the way they breathed. The house smelled like rosemary and butter. Outside, the neighborhood was still. Maplewood Drive rarely saw trouble. Porch lights flickered on as dusk settled in. Inside, the conversation drifted from work to weekend plans. Emily mentioned the hospital had been short-staffed. Thomas complained about property taxes. Margaret asked Daniel how the real estate market was doing. Better than ever, Daniel said smoothly. People are desperate to move before interest rates climb again. Claire stared down at her plate. Margaret noticed. "Sweetheart, are you feeling all right?" she asked gently. Claire forced a smile. "Just tired." Daniel reached for her hand under the table. She flinched, almost imperceptibly, but Emily saw it. Then Thomas changed the subject. "Did you hear about that missing teacher?" he asked. "What was her name?" "Rachel Whitmore," Emily said quietly. The room dimmed slightly, as if even the lights understood the weight of the name. Rachel Whitmore, 28 years old, elementary school teacher, missing since Thursday night. Her photo had been everywhere. Bright smile, brown hair, kind eyes. "No sign of forced entry," Thomas continued. "Police think she knew whoever took her." Margaret shook her head. That poor girl's mother must be sick with worry. Daniel cut into his check-in carefully. "People don't just vanish. There's always an explanation." Emily studied him. His tone wasn't sympathetic. It was measured. Claire's fork scraped loudly against her plate. Silence lingered for a second too long. Margaret stood up to refill glasses. Daniel's phone buzzed on the table. He flipped it over quickly before anyone could see the screen. Emily caught a glimpse of the notification preview before it disappeared. Unknown number. Her stomach tightened. Daniel excused himself moments later, claiming he needed to take a quick call outside. Through the dining room window, Emily watched him step on the porch. He wasn't speaking. He was just standing there, breathing heavily, staring into the darkness. When he returned, his smile was back in place. "Everything okay?" Claire asked quietly. "Yeah," he said. "Just work." Margaret brought out dessert, apple pie, Daniel's favorite. He barely touched it. At 8:47 p.m., Thomas began telling an old family story about a camping trip gone wrong. Laughter slowly returned to the table. For a moment, everything felt normal again. Warm. Safe. And then
3 knocks echoed through the house. Not rushed, not hesitant, deliberate. Everyone froze. Thomas frowned. Were we expecting someone? Daniel's face drained of color. Margaret stood slowly, smoothing her apron. "I'll see who it is." Daniel started to rise. "No, I've got it." But Margaret was already halfway down the hallway. The second knock came louder. Claire's hand gripped the edge of the table. Emily felt something shift in the air, something irreversible. Margaret opened the door. 2 uniformed police officers stood beneath the porch light. Behind them, a man in a dark coat. "Mrs. Harper?" The man asked calmly. "Yes?" "Is Daniel Harper home?" From the dining room, Daniel stopped breathing. And in that suspended second, before the words were spoken, before the truth unraveled, before the family understood that nothing would ever be the same, the Harper home was still whole. Margaret's hand trembled against the doorknob. The porch light cast a harsh glow across the faces of the two uniformed officers. Behind them stood a third man in a dock overcoat, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Harper?" he asked gently. "Yes?" Her voice barely carried. "I'm Detective Aaron Morales. Is Daniel Harper home?" The name hung in the air like smoke. From the dining room, Daniel stepped into view. "I'm Daniel," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "What's this about?" Detective Morales studied him carefully. "Sir, we need to speak with you regarding an ongoing investigation." Thomas approached slowly from behind. "Investigation? What investigation?" The detective didn't break eye contact with Daniel. "The disappearance of Rachel Whitmore." Claire's chair scraped loudly against the floor behind them. "That's ridiculous," Daniel said quickly. "I don't even know anyone by that name." Emily felt a cold ripple move through her spine. The detective tilted his head slightly. "Are you certain?" Daniel swallowed. "Yes." One of the officers stepped forward. "Mr. Harper, may we come inside?" Margaret hesitated, but stepped aside. The officers entered. The warm smell of rosemary and baked apples mixed awkwardly with the cold air that followed them in. They moved into the living room. The half-eaten dinner sat abandoned behind them. Detective Morales reached into his coat and removed a folded document. "Mr. Harper, we have phone records indicating consistent communication between you and Miss Whitmore over the past 6 weeks." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That must be a mistake." "It isn't." Claire's breathing grew shallow. Emily watched her brother carefully. He wasn't confused. He was calculating. "That was business," Daniel said quickly. "I'm a real estate agent. I talk to clients." "At 11 o'clock at night?" Morales asked calmly. Daniel's eyes flickered. "Sometimes." The detective unfolded the paper. "We also have surveillance footage placing your vehicle outside Miss Whitmore's apartment Thursday evening." Claire turned toward him slowly. "You told me you were working late at the office." Daniel's voice sharpened. "I was. At her apartment." Silence. Thomas stepped forward angrily. "This is harassment. You can't just come into our home making accusations." Morales remained steady. "We're not accusing anyone. We're asking questions." He turned back to Daniel. "Would you be willing to come down to the station and clarify a few details?" Daniel forced a small laugh. "This is insane. You're acting like I did something." Morales' expression didn't change. "At this moment, you're not under arrest. But we strongly advise you to cooperate." Claire stared at her husband as though she was seeing him for the first time. "Daniel," she whispered. "Why didn't you tell me you knew her?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the detective. "Fine. I'll answer your questions." Margaret stepped closer to her son. "You'll be back soon, right?" Daniel nodded. "Of course, Mom. It's just a misunderstanding." But his eyes avoided hers. As he walked toward the door, the second officer spoke. "Sir, before we leave, we need to inform you that Miss Whitmore's car was found abandoned early Friday morning." 3 knocks echoed through the house. Not rushed, not hesitant, deliberate. Everyone froze. Thomas frowned. Were we expecting someone? Daniel's face drained of color. Margaret stood slowly, smoothing her apron. "I'll see who it is." Daniel started to rise. No, I've got it. But Margaret was already halfway down the hallway. The second knock came louder. Claire's hand gripped the edge of the table. Emily felt something shift in the air, something irreversible. Margaret opened the door. 2 uniformed police officers stood beneath the porch light. Behind them, a man in a dark coat. "Mrs. Harper?" The man asked calmly. "Yes?" "Is Daniel Harper home?" From the dining room, Daniel stopped breathing. And in that suspended second, before the words were spoken, before the truth unraveled, before the family understood that nothing would ever be the same, the Harper home was still whole. Margaret's hand trembled against the doorknob. The porch light cast a harsh glow across the faces of the 2 uniformed officers. Behind them stood a third man in a dock overcoat, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Harper?" he asked gently. "Yes?" Her voice barely carried. "I'm Detective Aaron Morales. Is Daniel Harper home?" The name hung in the air like smoke. From the dining room, Daniel stepped into view. "I'm Daniel," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "What's this about?" Detective Morales studied him carefully. "Sir, we need to speak with you regarding an ongoing investigation." Thomas approached slowly from behind. "Investigation? What investigation?" The detective didn't break eye contact with Daniel. "The disappearance of Rachel Whitmore." Claire's chair scraped loudly against the floor behind them. "That's ridiculous," Daniel said quickly. "I don't even know anyone by that name." Emily felt a cold ripple move through her spine. The detective tilted his head slightly. "Are you certain?" Daniel swallowed. "Yes." One of the officers stepped forward. "Mr. Harper, may we come inside?" Margaret hesitated, but stepped aside. The officers entered. The warm smell of rosemary and baked apples mixed awkwardly with the cold air that followed them in. They moved into the living room. The half-eaten dinner sat abandoned behind them. Detective Morales reached into his coat and removed a folded document. "Mr. Harper, we have phone records indicating consistent communication between you and Miss Whitmore over the past 6 weeks." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That must be a mistake." "It isn't." Claire's breathing grew shallow. Emily watched her brother carefully. He wasn't confused. He was calculating. "That was business," Daniel said quickly. "I'm a real estate agent. I talk to clients." "At 11 o'clock at night?" Morales asked calmly. Daniel's eyes flickered. "Sometimes." The detective unfolded the paper. "We also have surveillance footage placing your vehicle outside Miss Whitmore's apartment Thursday evening." Claire turned toward him slowly. "You told me you were working late at the office." Daniel's voice sharpened. "I was. At her apartment." Silence. Thomas stepped forward angrily. "This is harassment. You can't just come into our home making accusations." Morales remained steady. "We're not accusing anyone. We're asking questions." He turned back to Daniel. "Would you be willing to come down to the station and clarify a few details?" Daniel forced a small laugh. "This is insane. You're acting like I did something." Morales' expression didn't change. "At this moment, you're not under arrest. But we strongly advise you to cooperate." Claire stared at her husband as though she was seeing him for the first time. "Daniel," she whispered. "Why didn't you tell me you knew her?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the detective. "Fine. I'll answer your questions." Margaret stepped closer to her son. "You'll be back soon, right?" Daniel nodded. "Of course, Mom. It's just a misunderstanding."
but his eyes avoided hers. As he walked toward the door, the second officer spoke. "Sir, before we leave, we need to inform you that Miss Whitmore's car was found abandoned early Friday morning."
The room shifted. "What does that have to do with me?" Daniel snapped. "It was located less than a mile from Pine Hollow Forest." Emily felt her pulse in her ears. Daniel loved Pine Hollow. Hiking trails, quiet overlooks. He had taken them there dozens of times growing up. The detective watched his reaction closely. Daniel's composure faltered for just a second. Then it returned. "That's a public forest," he said. "Lots of people go there." "Of course," Morales replied. Claire stepped forward suddenly. "Did you go there Thursday night?" Daniel looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't answer immediately. "That's not relevant," he said flatly. "It is to me," Claire whispered. Silence swallowed the room. The detective gave a small nod to the officers. "Mr. Harper, please bring your phone with you." Daniel hesitated. "Why?" "We'll need to review your recent activity." "It's private." Morales' tone cooled slightly. "In cases involving missing persons, privacy becomes secondary." Thomas's voice cracked. "Daniel, just give them the phone." Slowly, Daniel reached into his pocket. He handed it over. The officer powered it down and placed it into an evidence bag. Claire stared at the plastic like it was something toxic. Margaret grabbed Daniel's hand. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said firmly. Daniel squeezed her fingers. "Of course not." But his palm was damp. As he stepped outside, the night air felt heavier than before. The porch light flickered faintly. Neighbors' curtains shifted. Doors opened just enough for shadows to observe. Daniel turned back toward the house. For a moment, something unreadable crossed his face. Fear, regret, or something colder. The officers guided him toward the cruiser. The back door opened. He paused before getting in. "I'll be home soon," he said loudly, as if convincing himself. The door shut. The cruiser pulled away slowly. Red and blue lights flashed silently against the quiet houses of Maplewood Drive. Inside, the Harper home felt different. The warmth that drained from it. Claire stood in the center of the living room, unmoving. Emily approached her carefully. "You didn't know?" Emily asked softly. Claire shook her head once. "No." Margaret sank into a chair. Thomas stared at the empty doorway. No one spoke for nearly a minute. Then Claire whispered the question none of them were ready to ask. What if this isn't a misunderstanding? The silence that followed was louder than the knock. The interview room was colder than Daniel expected. Gray walls, metal table bolted to the floor, a single camera mounted in the corner. Detective Aaron Morales sat across from him, a thin folder resting between them. Daniel kept his posture straight. Confident. Controlled. "This is voluntary," Morales began calmly. "You're not under arrest." Daniel nodded. "Good, because this is a waste of time." Morales didn't react. "Let's start simple. How did you know Rachel Whitmore?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "She contacted me about selling her condo." "When was that?" "About a month ago." Morales opened the folder. "She first messaged you 7 weeks ago. After midnight." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "She worked late sometimes." "Your first response was at 12:18 a.m., Morales continued. "You told her you'd be happy to meet privately." Daniel leaned back. "I meet clients privately all the time." Morales slid a printed screenshot across the table. Daniel's eyes flicked down. The message read, "Rachel, I don't want to keep hiding. Daniel, not here. We'll talk Thursday." Daniel looked back up. "That doesn't prove anything." "It proves you weren't just discussing property values." Silence filled the room. Morales folded his hands. "Did your wife know about Rachel?" Daniel's expression hardened. "That's irrelevant." "Was she pregnant?" The question hit. A flicker. There. Gone in a second. Daniel stared at the table.
Morales leaned slightly forward. Rachel Whitmore disappeared Thursday night at approximately 11:20 p.m. He slid another paper forward. Your vehicle was captured entering her apartment complex at 9:14 p.m. Daniel's breathing shifted. Barely noticeable. You left at 11:17 p.m. That doesn't mean I harm her. What happened during those 2 hours? Daniel rubbed his hands together slowly. We talked. About what? Personal matters. Did you argue? Daniel hesitated. Not seriously. Morales tapped the folder lightly. A neighbor reported hearing raised voices around 10:40 p.m. Daniel's eyes narrowed. People argue? That's not illegal. Did she threaten to tell your wife? Daniel looked up sharply. No. The answer came too fast. Morales held his gaze. She texted you at 10:52 p.m. I'm done being a secret. Daniel said nothing. The detective let the silence stretch. It wasn't an accident. Silence makes people uncomfortable. Daniel finally shifted. She was emotional, he said quietly. She didn't mean it. And what did you mean when you replied, "You're not thinking clearly"? Daniel's fingers curled against the table. Morales continued. Rachel's phone last pinged at 11:24 p.m.
He placed a small map between them. A cell tower near Pine Hollow Forest. Daniel didn't look at it. You hike there often, Morales added. It's a public trail. At 11:30 at night? Daniel leaned forward now. Are you accusing me of something? I'm asking you why your phone GPS places you within half a mile of that tower at 11:31 p.m. The room went still. Daniel blinked once. That's impossible. It's not. Morales slid the GPS report across the table. Precise coordinates. Time-stamped. Daniel stared at it. For the first time since entering the room, his confidence wavered. I must have driven through, he said finally. I don't remember. You don't remember driving 12 miles in the opposite direction of your home? Daniel's silence spoke louder than any answer. Morales closed the folder slowly. Daniel? This is the part where you help yourself. Daniel's jaw tightened again. I didn't kill anyone. Morales studied him carefully. I didn't say you did. The door opened quietly. Another detective stepped inside and handed Morales a small evidence bag. Inside it, a silver bracelet. Delicate. Bent. Recognize this? Morales asked. Daniel looked at it, and something inside him shifted. It was Rachel's. She wore it in every photo. It was recovered near Pine Hollow this morning, Morales continued softly. Daniel swallowed. That doesn't prove anything. Morales' voice lowered. Search teams are expanding the area as we speak. The words lingered. Search teams. Expanding. Daniel's breathing became uneven. You're making assumptions, he said, but the strength was gone. Morales leaned back in his chair. Then give me a better explanation. Silence. 30 seconds. A minute. The ticking clock on the wall sounded louder than it should have. Daniel stared at the bracelet, then at his hands, then at the gray wall. He spoke quietly. We argued. Morales didn't interrupt. She said she was going to tell Claire, that she couldn't keep hiding, that she was tired of waiting. And? Daniel's voice tightened. I told her she was being irrational. Did you touch her? Daniel closed his eyes briefly. She grabbed me first. That's not what I asked. The door opened again. A uniformed officer stepped inside and whispered something into Morales' ear. The detective's expression changed. Not dramatically,
But enough. He nodded once. The officer left. Morales turned back to Daniel. They found something, he said quietly. Daniel's face drained of color. Found what? Morales didn't answer immediately.
He let the weight of uncertainty press down. They found disturbed soil. The air in the room thickened. Daniel's breathing became audible now. That doesn't mean. It means this isn't just a missing persons case anymore. Daniel stared at the table. His reflection in the metal surface looked unfamiliar. Smaller. Cornered. "I want a lawyer," he said finally. Morales nodded. "That's your right." He stood. As he reached the door, he paused. "One more thing, Daniel." Daniel didn't look up. If this was an accident, this is the moment to say so. Silence. The door closed. Daniel sat alone in the cold gray room. The camera in the corner recorded everything. The stillness. The shallow breathing. The way his hands began to shake once no one was watching. The forest was silent that morning. Pine Hollow stretched wide and indifferent beneath a pale gray sky. Yellow tape fluttered between trees as search teams moved carefully across damp earth. Boots pressed into mud softened by the night's cold. K-9 units worked in slow, deliberate patterns. Detective Morales stood near the perimeter, hands in his coat pockets, watching. At 9:12 a.m., one of the dogs stopped. Its posture changed instantly. Alert. Focused. The handler stiffened. "Over here." Officers moved in quickly. The ground looked uneven, slightly raised compared to the surrounding earth. Not obvious, not careless, but disturbed. A shovel cut into soil that was darker and looser than it should have been. The first layer came up easily, then another, and then fabric. Blue. Soft. Detective Morales stepped closer. It was a scarf, folded into the dirt like it had been pressed there in haste. Rachel Whitmore had worn it in the missing persons photo released to the media. The handler's dog began barking sharply now. Another shovel struck something beneath the surface. Not rock, not wood. The movement slowed. Careful now. Hands replaced tools. Gloved fingers brushed away soil. And then, skin. The world seemed to pause. An officer inhaled shortly. Rachel Whitmore lay beneath the earth, partially concealed, but unmistakable. Her eyes closed. Her brown hair tangled with dirt. There were no signs of a struggle around the grave. No scattered leaves, no broken branches. Whoever buried her had taken their time. Detective Morales stepped back slightly. He had seen this before, but it never felt routine. "Call it in," he said quietly. Across town, Daniel sat in the interrogation room, unaware that the search had ended. He stared at the wall clock, 10:03 a.m. He replayed Thursday night in his head. The argument, Rachel's voice shaking. "You promised me," she had said. "I didn't promise you anything," he had replied. "You said you'd leave her." Silence had followed that. Heavy. Dangerous. Back in the forest, the medical examiner's team arrived. Photographs were taken from every angle, each detail documented. The shallow depth of the grave suggested urgency, not planning. But the choice of location told a different story. Pine Hollow wasn't random. It was familiar. A place Daniel had visited since childhood. He knew the trails, the secluded spots, the overlooks where no one ventured after dark. Detective Morales crouched near the edge of the disturbed soil. There were faint tire impressions a few yards away, partial but visible. Crime scene technicians began casting them. The pattern was clear enough to compare later. Morales' phone buzzed. He stepped away before answering. "It's her," he said simply. Silence filled the other end. "Cause of death? Blunt force trauma appears likely. We'll confirm after autopsy." He hung up slowly. The case had just shifted, from missing to homicide. Back at the station, Daniel's attorney had arrived, a middle-aged man with sharp features and an even sharper tone. "Daniel," he said quietly once seated, "they found a body."
Daniel's breathing stopped for half a second. A body. Rachel Whitmore. Daniel leaned back. He closed his eyes. For a moment, his face was unreadable. Then he exhaled slowly. That doesn't mean I killed her. His attorney watched him closely. You were there that night. Daniel's eyes opened again. We argued. That's it. In Pine Hollow? Daniel hesitated, then shook his head. No. The lie came smoother this time. At the forest, officers expanded the search radius.
A few feet from the burial site, they found something else. A small metallic object half buried beneath leaves. A cufflink, silver, engraved with the initials DH. Detective Morales stared at it for a long moment before speaking. Baggett. He didn't smile. He didn't react outwardly. But internally, the final piece had begun to settle into place. Back at the Harper home, the news broke just before noon. Authorities have confirmed the body discovered in Pine Hollow Forest is believed to be that of missing teacher Rachel Whitmore. Margaret dropped the remote. Claire stood frozen in the living room. Emily covered her mouth. Thomas lowered himself slowly into a chair. On the television, aerial footage of the forest played over the reporter's voice. Yellow tape, police vehicles, flashing lights. The camera panned briefly over the wooded trail Daniel used to hike every summer. Claire's voice trembled. He said he was at the office. No one responded. The silence between them was thick with realization. Margaret shook her head. My son would never. But she didn't finish the sentence, because even she wasn't certain anymore. At the medical examiner's office, preliminary findings confirmed what detectives suspected. Blunt force trauma to the back of the head. No defensive wounds. Rachel hadn't fought. She had trusted the person standing behind her. The time of death was estimated between 11 and 11:30 p.m., exactly when Daniel's phone had pinged near Pine Hollow. Detective Morales stood outside the observation window, staring at the report. He thought about the dinner table, the half-eaten pie, the mother defending her son without hesitation. He thought about Daniel's calm demeanor, the measured answers, the selective memory. And then he thought about the cufflink. Personal, careless, left behind in the dirt. People always left something behind. In the interrogation room, Daniel's attorney leaned forward. They have location data placing you near Pine Hollow. We need to talk strategy. Daniel's fingers drummed against the table. They can't prove anything. They found her body. Daniel's jaw tightened. That doesn't mean I buried her. The attorney paused. You're saying you didn't? Daniel looked at him, and for a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. A flicker of panic, regret, or guilt. Then it was gone. I didn't kill her, he said firmly. But in Pine Hollow, beneath a canopy of silent trees, the earth told a different story, and the forest had already given up its secret. The day Rachel Whitmore was found, the investigation accelerated. What had once been a missing persons case was now a homicide, and Daniel Harper was no longer just a person of interest. He was the center of it. At the crime lab, technicians worked methodically. The silver cufflink recovered near the burial site was photographed, measured, and tested. The engraving was clear. The H. Detective Morales didn't rely on coincidence. A search warrant was executed at Daniel's home before sunset. Claire stood in the doorway as officers moved past her. She didn't protest. She didn't speak. She simply stepped aside. In the master bedroom, detectives opened Daniel's dresser. Inside a velvet-lined box sat a matching cufflink. Only one. The pair was incomplete. Morales held it carefully in a gloved hand. The engraving matched perfectly. D.H. Personalized. Custom-ordered. Not something easily replaced.
In the garage, forensic teams examined Daniel's black SUV. Under bright portable lights, the vehicle lost its polished image. It became evidence. The trunk lining was removed, swabbed, tested. Underneath the surface, faint traces of diluted blood reacted to luminol. Even after cleaning, even after scrubbing, the chemical glow didn't lie. Technicians photographed the reaction, collected samples, bagged fibers. In the passenger footwell, they discovered soil embedded deep into the floor mat grooves. Dark, rich, consistent with the soil composition of Pine Hollow. The case was tightening. At the station, Daniel sat with his attorney again.
They searched your house, the attorney said evenly. Daniel's expression didn't change. They won't find anything. They already found something. Daniel's fingers stopped moving. The cufflink, the attorney continued. One of the pair was recovered near the burial site. Daniel leaned back slowly. That doesn't prove I killed her. It places you there. Daniel's jaw tightened. I hike there, I told you that. At night. Daniel didn't answer. The attorney studied him carefully. They're also processing your vehicle. Silence. Daniel stared at the wall. They're building a timeline, the attorney continued. You need to tell me exactly what happened Thursday night. Daniel's voice dropped. We argued. And she said she was keeping the baby. The words finally surfaced. The attorney went still. You didn't tell me that. Daniel's eyes were distant now. She said she was done hiding, that she would tell Claire everything. Did you touch her? Daniel's breathing grew uneven. She pushed me.
That's not what I asked. Daniel's voice sharpened. I didn't mean for anything to happen. The attorney leaned forward. What does that mean? Daniel's composure cracked for just a second. It was dark, he said quietly. We were near the trees. The attorney froze. You went to Pine Hollow. Daniel closed his eyes. She wanted to talk somewhere private. And? She wouldn't stop. The words were fragmented now, unsteady. I told her we needed time. She kept saying there was no more time. The attorney spoke carefully. Daniel, did you hit her? Silence filled the room. 30 seconds. 40. Then, I shoved her. The admission hung in the air. She fell. On what? A rock. I don't know. The attorney's voice hardened. And then what? Daniel's breathing became shallow again. She wasn't moving. Did you call for help? Daniel's eyes flickered. No. Why not? Daniel's face twisted slightly. I panicked. The words sounded rehearsed. Weak. The attorney leaned back slowly. Panic doesn't dig graves. Daniel said nothing. Back at the lab, results began returning. The blood traces in the SUV matched Rachel Whitmore's DNA. The soil from the trunk matched Pine Hollow's unique Pine Hollow mineral profile. Phone data confirmed Daniel's GPS coordinates remained stationary near the burial site for 42 minutes. 42 minutes. Long enough to dig. Long enough to decide. Detective Morales reviewed the full timeline. 9:14 p.m. Daniel arrives at Rachel's apartment. 11:17 p.m. Daniel leaves complex. 11:31 p.m. GPS near Pine Hollow clearing. 12:18 a.m. Daniel's phone powered off for 27 minutes. 12:52 a.m. Phone powered back on en route home. There were no calls to 911. No attempts to seek help. Just silence. Calculated silence. Morales leaned back in his chair. He had seen accidents before. They looked messy. Frantic. This didn't feel messy. It felt controlled. At the Harper house, Claire sat alone in the dim living room. Daniel's closet remained half open upstairs. His suits hung neatly in a row. His hiking boots were missing. Police had taken them for analysis. She replayed Thursday night in her mind. You're working late? She had asked.
Just paperwork, he'd replied casually. She had believed him. Now every memory felt contaminated. Her phone buzzed. A New Zealand. Evidence mounts against local real estate agent in teacher's death. Claire turned the screen face down. Tears slid quietly down her face. The following morning, prosecutors reviewed the compiled evidence. Physical, digital, circumstantial. It formed a coherent narrative. An affair, an unwanted pregnancy, a confrontation, a decision. Detective Morales stood at the window of his office. Rain tapped lightly against the glass. Daniel Harper had maintained his innocence publicly, but the evidence was no longer whispering. It was speaking clearly. In the interrogation room once more, Daniel sat alone. He stared at his hands, the same hands that once carved chicken at a family dinner table, the same hands that once held Rachel's, the same hands that had dug into cold forest soil. He whispered to himself, it wasn't supposed to happen. But sometimes, it's not the moment of anger that defines someone.
It's what they choose to do afterward. And Daniel Harper had chosen to bury the truth. Now, the truth was rising. The pressure didn't explode all at once. It built slowly, like water pressing against a cracked dam. Daniel had been formally arrested the morning after the lab results came back. Second-degree murder. He didn't resist when they placed the handcuffs on him. He didn't argue. He just nodded once, as if this had always been inevitable. The arraignment was brief. Cameras crowded the courthouse steps. Microphones extended like weapons. Did you kill Rachel Whitmore?
Was it about the baby? Do you regret it? Daniel said nothing. His jaw remained tight, his eyes fixed forward. But when someone shouted, "Your wife trusted you," his composure flickered, just slightly. Inside the holding cell that night, the silence was louder than any accusation. No polished dining table, no warm kitchen lights, no carefully crafted smile, just concrete, steel, and memory. He replayed Pine Hollow again, Rachel's voice shaking. "You don't get to walk away from this." "I'm not ready," he had said. "You'll never be ready." The argument escalated, words overlapping, frustration, fear, desperation. She had turned away from him first. That part haunted him. The way she turned, as if disappointed. He reached for her arm. She pulled back. His hand pushed. Too hard. She stumbled. The sound her head made when it struck the rock. He would never unhear it. He remembered kneeling beside her, calling her name, shaking her shoulders. There was blood. Not much, but enough. Her chest wasn't moving. He told himself she would wake up. She didn't. The forest felt impossibly quiet. No witnesses, no cars. Just him and a decision. Call for help or protect himself. He chose himself. Detective Morales returned to the interrogation room one final time before formal charges were filed. Daniel sat across from him, no attorney present yet. "You asked for me," Morales said calmly. Daniel's eyes looked different now, less certain. "I didn't plan it," Daniel said quietly. Morales didn't sit. "I believe that." Daniel swallowed. "It was an accident." "Accidents are followed by 911 calls," Morales replied evenly. Daniel looked down. "I was scared." "So you buried her?" Silence. Daniel's voice cracked for the first time. "I couldn't lose everything." Morales studied him. "Rachel lost everything." The words landed heavily. Daniel's shoulders sagged slightly. "I loved my wife," he said. Morales didn't respond. Because love doesn't look like secrecy, or lies, or a shallow grave. Daniel continued, almost to himself. "I thought if I fixed it, if I made it disappear, I could go back." "Back to what?" Morales asked. Daniel looked up. "To dinner." The simplicity of the answer lingered. Back to the table. Back to the pie. Back to before the knock. Morales shook his head slightly. "You can't bury consequences." Daniel's eyes filled, but no tears fell. "I didn't mean to kill her." "But you meant to hide her." Daniel didn't argue, because that part was true. Meanwhile, Claire made her decision. She filed for divorce that afternoon. Irreconcilable differences. She didn't visit him. She didn't call.
When reporters asked for comment, she gave only one sentence. I didn't know the man I married. Margaret, however, visited Daniel at the jail. She sat across from him through thick glass. Her hands trembled as she picked up the receiver. Tell me it's not true, she whispered. Daniel stared at her. Her mother. The woman who defended him without hesitation. It was an accident, he said. Margaret searched his face. Did you bury her? Daniel hesitated. And in that hesitation, Margaret found her answer. Her shoulders folded inward as if something inside her had finally collapsed. You should have called for help, she whispered. Daniel looked away. I know. But knowing came too late. The prosecution finalized its theory. Not premeditated, but intentional concealment. A man cornered by exposure. A man who chose reputation over responsibility. The cufflink. The blood. The GPS. The deleted messages. And now, his own admission of being there. The dam had broken. Slowly. Inevitably. Daniel Harper was no longer fighting the evidence. He was drowning in it. In his cell that night, he stared at the ceiling. The hum of fluorescent lights replaced the quiet of the forest. For the first time, he allowed himself to think about Rachel's parents.
The phone call they received, the way her mother must have collapsed, the way her father must have clenched his fists helplessly. He squeezed his eyes shut. But memory doesn't disappear just because you want it to. He had tried that once already, and it had led him here. Back on Maplewood Drive, the Harper house stood dark. No candles, no laughter, no second chances. The dinner table remained where it had always been, but something invisible sat at it now. Absence, and the echo of 3 knocks that changed everything. The trial began 9 months after Rachel Whitmore was found in Pine Hollow. By then, the story had spread far beyond Maplewood Drive. Courtroom seats filled before sunrise. Reporters lined the hallway. True crime podcasts debated the case weekly. Inside the courtroom, everything felt smaller than it had on television. Wooden benches, muted walls, a seal of the state mounted above the judge's chair. And at the defense table, Daniel Harper, clean-shaven, wearing a navy suit that no longer fit quite the same. He avoided looking toward the gallery, avoided looking at Rachel's parents, avoided looking at Claire, but he couldn't avoid the evidence. The prosecution opened first. Rachel Whitmore trusted the man who killed her. The prosecutor began, voice steady but sharp, and when she needed help the most, he chose to protect himself instead. The jury listened carefully. Photos appeared on a large screen. Rachel smiling, Rachel teaching her students, Rachel wearing the blue scarf later found buried in soil. Then the tone shifted. Images of Pine Hollow, yellow tape, the shallow grave, the silver cuffling engraved DH. The prosecutor paused deliberately. This case is not about a moment of anger, she continued. It is about what happened after. She let that sink in. After Rachel Whitmore lay unconscious, Daniel Harper had choices. A slide changed, phone records, GPS data, timestamps. He chose not to call 911. Another slide, the luminal reaction glowing in the trunk of his SUV. He chose to clean. Another slide, soil analysis matching Pine Hollow. He chose to bury. The courtroom was silent, except for the faint hum of the projector. And then, the prosecutor said quietly, he chose to sit at dinner with his family and pretend nothing happened. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't react. The defense countered with a different narrative.
This was not murder, the defense attorney argued. This was a tragic accident fueled by emotion and fear. He paced slowly before the jury. There was no weapon, no premeditated plan, no history of violence. He gestured toward Daniel, a man with no criminal record, a respected professional, a husband. The word husband hung in the air. Claire stared straight ahead. The defense continued. Rachel Whitmore and Daniel Harper argued. She pushed him. He pushed back. She fell. He lowered his voice. He panicked. The word echoed. Panicked. He made terrible decisions after the fall, but panic does not equal murder.
Witnesses followed. Forensic experts explained the blood evidence. Crime scene analysts described the burial site. A digital analyst walked the jury through the GPS data minute by minute. When the silver cufflink was presented, it was passed carefully to the jury box. The engraving caught the light. D.H. Personalized. Precise. Rachel's mother closed her eyes. Rachel's father gripped the edge of the bench until his knuckles turned white. Then, Claire took the stand. The courtroom shifted when she entered. She looked smaller than she once had, fragile but steady. "Did you know about your husband's relationship with Rachel Whitmore?" the prosecutor asked gently. "No," Claire replied. Her voice was calm. "When did you find out?" "When the police knocked on the door." She swallowed. "He told me he was working late that night." "And did you believe him?" "Yes." A pause. "Do you believe him now?" Claire hesitated only briefly. "No." Daniel finally looked at her, but she didn't return the glance. Margaret Harper also testified. Her voice trembled from the beginning. "My son is not a monster," she said. The defense guided her carefully. "He made a mistake." The prosecutor stood for cross-examination. "Mrs. Harper," she began softly, "did your son ever deny burying Rachel Whitmore?" Margaret froze. The courtroom seemed to lean forward. "He said it was an accident," she replied quietly. "That wasn't my question." Silence. Margaret's eyes filled. "No," she whispered. That single word echoed louder than anything else said that day. Finally, Daniel took the stand. Against his attorney's initial advice, he faced the jury. He spoke clearly. "I didn't wake up that morning intending to hurt anyone," he began. He described the argument, the shove, the fall. "I thought she would get up," he said. His voice cracked. "I swear, I thought she would get up." "And when she didn't?" the prosecutor asked during cross-examination. Daniel's throat tightened. "I was scared."
Scared of what? Losing everything. The prosecutor stepped closer. "So you buried her to save yourself?" Daniel looked down. "I wasn't thinking." "But you dug," she said firmly. "You wiped your trunk. You deleted messages." Each word landed deliberately. "That's not panic, Mr. Harper. That's calculation." Daniel had no answer. Closing arguments came quickly after. The defense urged the jury to see a flawed man, not a killer. The prosecution urged them to see Rachel, to remember that she never had a chance to tell her side. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. Daniel sat motionless as the courtroom filled again the next afternoon. The foreperson stood. The paper trembled slightly in her hands. "On the charge of second-degree murder, we find the defendant," a breath held collectively, "guilty." The word fell heavy. Claire closed her eyes. Rachel's mother wept openly. Margaret let out a sound that barely resembled a voice. Daniel remained still, as if the verdict had been expected all along. The judge spoke next. "Daniel Harper, your actions did not end in panic. They ended in concealment. You had opportunities to do the right thing. You chose otherwise. Sentencing would come weeks later, but the breaking point had already arrived. The illusion was gone. The mask had fallen, and the man who once sat comfortably at a family dinner table now stood convicted of taking a life and trying to bury the truth beside it. Sentencing day felt quieter than the trial. There were fewer cameras, fewer reporters, but the weight in the courtroom was heavier. Daniel Harper stood once more before the judge.
No cameras this time. No dramatic presentations. Just consequences. Daniel Harper, the judge began, voice firm and measured. You were not convicted because you panicked. You were convicted because you chose yourself over a life. The courtroom remained silent. You will serve 25 years to life in state prison. The words landed without echo.
Daniel nodded once, as if confirming something he had already accepted. Behind him, Margaret wept softly. Claire did not attend. Rachel's parents held each other tightly. Their daughter would never grow older than 28. Daniel was transferred to state prison 2 weeks later. The intake process stripped away everything familiar: his belt, his watch, his tailored suits. In their place, standard issue clothing and a number. He no longer introduced himself as Daniel Harper. He became inmate 47219. The routine was immediate and unyielding. Lights on at 5:30 a.m., meals at precise intervals, limited yard time, concrete, metal, noise. There was no Pine Hollow here, no dining room, no illusion of control. The first night in his cell, he lay on the thin mattress staring at the ceiling. He replayed the dinner again. The rosemary scent. His father carving chicken. His mother smiling. The knock. If he had called 911. If he had stayed. If he had chosen differently. But prison is built on the ruins of if, and regret has nowhere to go inside four walls. Back on Maplewood Drive, the Harper home was sold within 6 months. Margaret couldn't bear the quiet. Every room carried an echo. The hallway where police once stood. The dining room where laughter turned into suspicion. She and Thomas moved to a smaller house across town. Thomas spoke less. He aged quickly. Margaret kept a framed photo of Daniel as a child on her bedside table. She visited him twice a year. Each visit shorter than the last. Each goodbye heavier. Claire finalized the divorce shortly after sentencing. She returned to her maiden name. She moved to another state. She declined every interview request. Friends said she avoided crowded rooms, avoided questions, avoided Maplewood Drive entirely. She once told a close friend, the worst part wasn't the affair. It was realizing he could sit at that table like nothing happened. Trust, once broken at that depth, doesn't mend. It dissolves. Emily transferred hospitals. She couldn't stand the whispers, couldn't stand the sideways glances from colleagues who followed the case online. She kept in contact with Margaret, but she never visited Daniel. Not once. To her, the breaking point wasn't the verdict. It was the burial. Accidents happen, but digging requires time, and thought,
and decision. Rachel Whitmore's parents channeled their grief differently. They established the Whitmore Teaching Scholarship in her name. Each year, one aspiring elementary teacher received financial support. At the award ceremony, Rachel's mother spoke softly. My daughter loved her students. She believed in second chances, but she also believed in responsibility. The scholarship grew steadily. Rachel's name became attached not to headlines, but to hope. Years passed. Appeals were filed and denied. Daniel maintained that he never intended to kill Rachel. But intent was no longer the question. Choice was. In prison, he kept mostly to himself. He worked in the library. He avoided conflicts. He rarely spoke about his case. But at night, when the lights dimmed and a noise softened, he saw Pine Hollow. He heard the argument. He felt the weight of soil in his hands. And sometimes he imagined a different ending. Calling for help. Holding pressure to the wound. Waiting for sirens.
facing consequences immediately. Perhaps Rachel survives. Perhaps she doesn't. But at least the truth wouldn't have been buried with her.
On the 10th anniversary of Rachel's death, Pine Hollow looked the same as it always had. Trees tall and indifferent, birds moving through branches. The forest doesn't remember, but people do. A small group gathered near the trail entrance that evening. Rachel's parents, former colleagues, friends. They released white flowers into the nearby stream, not at the burial site, but somewhere open, somewhere with light, because Rachel deserved a light. That same evening, hundreds of miles away, Daniel sat alone in his cell. He had marked the date quietly. He didn't attend group activities that day. He didn't check out a book. He simply sat. The prison walls did not soften with time. They just become familiar. He once believed he could preserve his life by hiding a mistake, but hiding only delayed the inevitable. The knock always comes. Sometimes from police at the door, sometimes from conscience in the quiet. A family dinner ended with flashing lights and handcuffs, but its aftermath stretched for years. Across marriages, across parents' hearts, across a forest that gave up its secret, and across a man who learned too late that protecting an image can cost far more than telling the truth. Some stories end with a verdict, a sentence, a closed courtroom door. But this one didn't, because long after the headlines faded, long after the cameras left Maplewood Drive, the consequences remained. A mother still visits a prison. A father still avoids the subject. A woman rebuilds her life under a different name, and a family sets an empty place in their hearts, where Rachel Whitmore should have been. What began as an ordinary Sunday dinner became a reminder of something chilling. It's not always the stranger in the dark we should fear. Sometimes, it's the person who knows exactly how to smile across the table. One decision, one moment, one choice to protect an image instead of a life, and everything changes. If this story moved you, let it stay with you, because behind every true crime case is more than evidence and timelines. There are families, there are futures, and there are knocks that can never be unheard. Subscribe for more in-depth true crime documentaries. And remember, the truth doesn't stay buried forever. But at least the truth wouldn't have been buried with her.